recap briefly, at least what we heard last week. The Rebbe pointed out where is the godly soul situated, where's the animal situated. So the beginning of the page, the first part of the page, the Rebbe says exactly that both of them have their position. Where they are situated within man. So he said the godly soul is situated in the intellect, in the brain. As we mentioned a few times, that the godly soul is essentially intellectual. It does everything based on structured intellect, and additional to that, or mainly, when you're dealing with a godly soul, it makes a decision based on the godly gain, not just as, for example, the godly gain or the intellectual gain, or the gain based on intellect, as opposed to, as he goes on explaining, that for the beginning of the chapter begins of the station of the animal soul. The animal soul is in the heart, and we explained also what's the connection of the animal soul and why do we say it's situated in the heart. Because that's what the animal soul is all about. If you think about the life of the animal, it's all about heart. It doesn't have much brain. It does something whatever the heart says to do, and whatever the heart explains or sends the signal. This is going to contribute to the body's desire, body's comfort. And this is going to contribute to the body's comfort. If you look at the life of the animal, it's all about heart. For that matter, we mentioned the Gemara Kelev, which is the dog, right? It's the reason why it's called Kelev is because Kuli Lev. It's all about heart. That's the life of the animal. It's all about heart. There's no intellect. It has some understanding. It knows how to implement its heart's desires. It knows where the barn is, where the barn is, or where the food is being given, served, and so on. So it has a bit of understanding how to implement its heart desire. But it's not about brain. It's all about heart. That's the life of the animal. It's animalistic.
And you use heart's desire like Tanya?
Yeah. Yes. That is right. The heart is the heart. It's the heart's desire. So that's the base. That is the base of the animal soul. That's the base of the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, right? We were dealing with the two souls, the animal soul and the godly soul. As opposed to the godly soul, its main base is the brain. And the Alter Rebbe continues, and then it has kind of satellite base also in the heart. The Alter Rebbe points out that the heart itself has two components, and again, this is medically proven as well. There's the right side where there's more the oxygen, and the left side where's the blood. The main flow of the blood is on the left side of the heart. So there's the two sides of the heart where the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, is a part of the blood, because as we mentioned, again, just saying a little tidbits over here of what we learned, that the blood is really the vessel, or this is which the vessel to which the soul, the animal soul, invests in the body. As we mentioned, the animal soul is the life and force and energy which gives man the life force to live and function as a human being. And the vessel which, or maybe you call it intermediary, but it's more than an intermediary. What is the vessel? What for the soul, in order to, in other words, the soul which makes man live and function is the blood. Man needs a certain amount of blood in order to function. Why so? Because the blood is this is the conducive substance, which is the keli, which is the vessel for the soul to enter and eventually express itself throughout the body. So that's why when we say about the animal soul, which is again the soul which gives life, the animal soul is synonymous with the soul and energy which makes man live, feel, be hungry, be thirsty, appreciate food, drink, and everything which is associated with the life of a human being. So so understandably, when we speak about the soul entering into the heart, or rather into the heart, what side of the heart? The heart where there's a concentration of blood, because blood is the the substance which is conducive to receive to where the animals can nefesh habasar b'dami. It's a pasuk. The soul enters into blood. That's why a person is so crucial. Man has a certain amount of blood to live. Why blood? Because blood is the container to which contains, which are the vessel to which picks up on the soul, and eventually the soul is able to express itself throughout the body. So the animal soul is in the heart. Its main base is in the heart, because the animal soul is all about heart, because animal is all about heart. The nefesh elikis, the godly soul, is in the brain, and its main station is in the brain, as we use the expression of headquarters in the brain. because it does everything al pi seichel, and more so al pi seichel iki, with a godly decision. That's what it bases its decisions on. And then it has as well a branch in the heart as well, but again the other side of the heart, close proximity, it neighbors the animal soul, because the point of the godly soul is not only to understand, intellectualize godliness and godly matters, etc., and makes decisions based on the godly drive, but more so it has a base in the heart, because it's important, it's crucial in the function of the godly soul to love Hashem. It doesn't just cancel heart, but it has a whole world of heart as well in its function. It has a world of love, fear, but love Hashem, a fervor's drive and love to Hashem, a fear of Hashem, reverence of Hashem, and so to all the other six, a total of 7 attributes and characters. So it has a base in the heart, because part of its function is to express itself in a hearty manner as well. But it begins by brain, because when we begin by brain, because everything it does, as we say, it's based on its comprehensive understanding and godliness. From there, it sends the messages we mentioned a few times in every matter, that brain intellect produces feelings. When a person understands something thoroughly, this gives him the drive to love it, if it's to be driven to it, if it's something positive, to be driven away from it, kind of in the context of fear, if it's something which he understands it's not such a good thing, or in this case, if something in the context of reverence, he understands this is something special, holy, so one has yira, fear from it. So it starts in the intellectual dimension, or rather it's based in the brain, and then eventually has a whole component, it has a base in the heart, because again, part of the function of the godly soul is to engulf in a flame of fire, fiery passion, may it be love or fear, also in the heart. Okay? As opposed to the animal soul, it's all about heart. But again, heart in the negative, and has love and fear from things which are materialistic, animalistic, etc. The Rebbe brings the pasuk. Interesting, there's a pasuk, and we learned it last week, but it's in this week's parsha. Olei Malei Yamotz. When Rivka didn't know what's going on with her pregnancy, she went to Lidresh to seek Hashem, and she was told that there's 2 different, distinct type of children, or distinct type of forces you have within yourself. One is Yaakov and one is Esav. And she is told, Olei Malei Yamotz, which means that they will never coincide. One will be diminished. One will reign. Consequently, the other one will lose its force and energy, and vice versa. If God forbid Esav reigns, Yaakov loses it's his force and his ability to exist, etc. Which means the influence of Yaakov. Because this is the point. In the bigger picture, Hashem tells Rivka that the world is ultimately going to become a Yaakov world. It'll be a battle, a constant battle, but the ultimate purpose is the whole world should become a Yaakov world. There shouldn't be not one part of the world which should be an Esav world. In the eyes of Esav, he wants the whole world to be an Esav world. And he doesn't want anything of Yaakov to be dominant in any part of the world. It just wants everything Esav. And Yaakov wants the other way around. And as we brought the pasuk, famous pasuk, we say it every day in davening, in the end of V'yashav v'hoyu Hashem v'melech ha'kol, or before that, lishpeitus har Esav, that the mandate of the Yid is to be dominant of the mountain of Esav. Why? Let's be dominant of the mountain of Yerushalayim, our own mountain. Why Esav? Because the point of the Yid, the mandate of the Yid, is that the whole entire world, like we conclude, Hashem Amlucha v'Hashem Melech HaKol Haaretz, God should reign, God should rule, and reign over the entire world. There shouldn't be not one place in the world which is devoid of God and godliness. That is the mandate of Yaakov. That's why it says, the point is to be dominant over the mountain of Esav via the Har Tziyad mind, via the mountain of Zion. Because the point is of Hashem's telling, basically Hashem told Rivka, the point is eventually the whole world should become a Yaakov world, a world which is influenced from Yaakov, not Chas v'Shalom from Esav. So the messenger who told this to Rivka made it very clear they could not coexist. It's either each one wants to have everything. Yaakov wants to have everything, and Esav wants to have everything. That is in the bigger picture, the macro picture. In the microcosmic picture, this is what we're dealing with. The body is the world, the body is the city. The godly soul wants to be dominant over the entire city, everything which makes up the body. The animal soul wants to have the entire body surrendered to it. And each one is not satisfied with a little bit. Give me your intellect, give me your heart, or give me part of your heart, and I'll be fine. If you'll give me, then you'll give me part of your heart. You give me part of your, give me part of your. You give me the thought, and I'll take the action. You'll take the speech. Now, the godly soul wants to be dominant over every part of the body. Every part of the body. If it has thought, it wants to be. It wants the thought to completely surrender to it. It has speech, it wants to surrender to it. It has heart, it wants to surrender to it. It has brain, it wants to surrender to it. And conversely, the animal soul wants the same. And again, the Alter Rebbe gives a very classic example. In the yesteryears, today also it exists. Pointed this out a little bit. We elaborated last week. Usually, when two kings, two monarchs, when they want to have a neutral territory, each one wants to conquer it. It doesn't just want to conquer it externally, or partially, just a few dimensions of this territory. It wants everything to be under its rulership completely. Like we said last week, the currency, the style, the rules, the regulations, everything should be. And the other king wants the other way around. Again, doesn't want to just put up a flag or something. It wants the entire system of the city should be under its run and governed by its own government. That's the way it is when you're dealing with a territory where two kings want to fight it. And for that matter, the more one king demonstrates its interest, it's parenthetically, the Alter Rebbe notes it later also in chapter 28, interestingly, that sometimes when a person starts doing something holy, starts davening, right? The way the joke goes, it was dealing with a meeting, and they couldn't come up with a solution. One guy says, give me a few minutes. I'm going to go daven mincha. Probably when I'll daven, all the thoughts are. I'm going to probably figure it out In other words, when sometimes a person davens, so many interesting thoughts come to his mind precisely in the 10 minutes when he's davening Shemon Esrei, in the 5 minutes he's davening Shemon Esrei, or the entire davening. And the way the joke goes, he says, we can't come to a solution. I'll daven mincha, probably some insight is going to come. In the end of the day, it's never going to work. Precisely this is what we figure out in the middle of davening. Probably it'll never be connected to any reality, because it was something to disturb the person's davening. But we're not going to go into these details over here. I'm just saying this parenthetically. Alter Rebbe mentions this, that many times, because it works the same way. Sometimes when you're dealing with neutral territory, when one king is quiet, so the other king is, okay, start tomorrow my war in 2 days, as long as no one's bothering, no one's saying their opinion. The moment one king decides to come in and conquer this neutral territory, that evokes by the other king that sense of victory, triumph. Now you want it, I want it. I'm coming to get it. And so it works interestingly that dafka, and because it works the same way, dafka when we start davening, we never have these thoughts and that thoughts, or any particular disturbance of what we're doing before davening, after davening. Something that's dafka when we start davening and we reach the climax, Shemon Esrei. All of a sudden, why does it happen so? Why did I have these particular thoughts before I started, or before I davened, or after I davened? The answer is because when you person davening, Hashem Kiss is making a statement over here. I want to take over. I want to conquer the concentration of this person. I want the body, the thought, and the sense of concentration, which is a necessity by davening, to be completely surrendered to this godly force and reality. That's what I want. The Nefesh Elikis. The Nefesh Muhammad says, "Is that what you want? You want to take over? No, I'm not going to allow you to take over. I'm coming in because you want to conquer." So we see over here this evidently that it works very similarly. It works similarly when you're dealing with the body, as the Alter Rebbe calls it, the city, and there's two kings, again, the godly soul and the animal soul. Each one wants to conquer it, meaning he wants everything of the city to be surrendered to it. This is, as we get closer to where we're holding, the final thing we learn is that the godly soul, as he elaborates more on the godly soul, eventually comes back to what the animal soul the end of the chapter, because what the animal soul wants, we pretty much know, or it's not important as much as the Alter Rebbe. The reason why the Alter Rebbe elaborates on the strategy of the godly souls, because firstly that's what we're supposed to do, and that's what we try to exercise and execute this strategy of the godly soul, not of the animal soul. But the Alter Rebbe is going to conclude the chapter saying the animal soul wants just the opposite. It wants the entire system, the entire body, completely surrendered to it. But here the Alter Rebbe explaining as the godly soul wants. The Alter Rebbe says, interestingly, the godly soul not only wants the entire city, as we said, the city in this case is the entire body. And we say body, it doesn't mean just external dimensions of the body. The most profound dimensions of the body is well. The body has vision, the body has the audio, the ability to hear, to think, to profoundly ponder, to feel, to love, to fear. All this, the godly soul wants it to be surrendered to it completely. But more so, and this is where we really concluded these words, the godly soul wants that the enemy, which is the Nefesh Bahamis, should ultimately be transformed and become an ally. And that's what the pasuk says, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha," with all your heart. So what does it say in the Mishnah? Why does it say b'chol levavcha in a plural expression? Should it say b'chol lipcha, with all your heart? I mean, referring to the heart of the heart expression of the godly soul. Why a plural expression? Because the Mishnah says that Hashem wants us to love Hashem b'chol b'shnei tzarech, with both Yitzhak Tov and Yitzhak Hara. And the question is, what do you mean Yitzhak Hara? Yitzhak Hara should love Hashem, and Yitzhak Hara loves everything else other than Hashem, or even things which are not particularly ungodly, but certainly not godly. Eat and drink and anything which is animalistic, basically, especially we classify the Yetzer Hara here. They could even eat many brilliantly, if you think about it, because Alter Rebbe is trying to say the Yetzer Hara is not necessarily doesn't have to be always looked at something bad or vicious or cruel, but it means anything animalistic. It's not godly. It's not ungodly, or rather, it's not something which is. It's something which is the complete antithesis of godliness, but something which is not godly. That's the animal soul. And to say that should love Hashem, it loves anything else other than Hashem. But the answer is, this is part of the part of the ambition and the part of the desire of the Nefesh Elikis, that every part of the body should surrender and subdue itself to its drives and its desires, which is, again, it's a godly soul, so it has godly desires and drives. But more so, that the animal soul should be completely transformed. Instead of an enemy and a foe, should become an ally. And that's what the pasuk says, "V'ahavtas Hashem b'chol levavcha." And Alter Rebbe, based on he quotes this pasuk and puts it in to the way where the Alter Rebbe positions the animal soul. We said before, the animal soul is on the left side, and the godly soul has its station. It's not its primary headquarter, right? It's not its primary station or headquarter. It has its base as well in the heart, so they neighbor each other. When the heart engulfs in a flamey fight of passion, in a godly passion, may it be love or fear of Hashem. So like you take two things, like we said last week, you take a cold cup of water and a hot cup of water. If you put it together, the cold cup of water will start warming up. Similarly, the heart of the godly soul, which is so manifest, or its position in the heart when it loves Hashem so much, and who does it neighbor? It neighbors the animal soul, which is in the left side of the heart. So then an animal soul starts warming up to the notion of God and godliness. And we concluded it means not that the godly soul, the animal soul becomes, or put it this way, it doesn't mean, it's like some we explained, we said, we quoted, sometimes you come into a home. It means the godly soul doesn't have to be explained. We said, speaking about keeping Shabbos, we use this example, if you remember. The godly soul doesn't have to be explained, the beauty of Shabbos. The godly soul is a part of God. And God writes in the Torah that a Yid has to keep Shabbos. That's the inherent, innate desire of the Nefesh Elikis, the godly soul. It doesn't have to be explained, doesn't be told, doesn't be warmed up from something. It's a part of God. And if God wants Shabbos, the godly soul wants Shabbos. And it wants to keep Shabbos to the maximum detail. Any detail it knows about, it's right there to keep be more stringent and more stringent. It doesn't have a problem because it's a godly soul. We say the animal soul is convinced. Slowly means that the animal soul, it's not the animal soul with 1 second becomes as godly soul. It means that it starts absorbing the message of Shabbos. You go into a home, the person comes into a home, especially someone who never knew of Shabbos. The atmosphere, the ambiance, which he sees in a home on a Friday night table, something which he never saw before in his life. if he never kept Shabbos. These are things which are convincing, not only from the perspective of the godly soul, which needs no conviction, from the animal soul, that I like to indulge in a good piece of meat, or I like a nice car, extra or overly indulgent in this, that, and the other. The animal soul starts appreciating Shabbos as an example, just giving one example, from the animalistic approach, from the animalistic perspective, that it's beautiful for me and my comforts and the stability of my home. Like we mentioned, we spoke about the family, the beauty of the Shabbos table. It's family life, it's concentration on things which we cannot concentrate when we're overly involved in our worldly affairs and business. The time to focus, the time to relax, the time to sit with family. So the animal soul is appreciating it not only the way the godly soul appreciates Shabbos, from its own perspective. Because we said that the animal soul, it's not bad, it's not something which fights godliness, it's something which is just animalistic. So when you train the animal can become from a desert animal to a domestic animal. And the same thing, we make it just a quick moment. So the same thing, when we say that the animal soul is convinced, it starts warming up from the love and drive of the godly soul, what's happening is that not that it's cancelled, you cancel the animal soul, that doesn't mean b'chalavavcha. B'chalavavcha means that the animal soul also loves Hashem. Why should an animal soul love Hashem? Because the animal soul is not essentially bad. It's a drive. It has a drive. If it's introduced, like we said last week also, you have a missile, right? It's a drive, it's a force, and it depends what kind of cap you put on the missile. It could be conventional, it could be not non-conventional, God forbid. The same thing, an animal soul, it's a drive. The fact that it finds itself in this world and it's open to and it's introduced to worldly and physical and maybe even crass entertainments, so it's driven there. But if you train it and you show that it could be truly entertained with things which are more spiritual or more refined and maybe more godly, it'll be driven to the spiritual, to this which is more refined, and eventually to godliness as well. As in the example, the godly soul doesn't have to be convinced about Shabbos, but Nefesh Bahamis, you could train it and say, wow, this is beautiful, from the animalistic approach as well, from the Nefesh Bahamis approach as well. That's what it means, Vahavta, which means the enemy becomes an ally. And eventually, Al Rebbe says that if you have something, like we said, if something is extremely hot, and it neighbors something which is very cold, so if this is constantly maintains its heat, and it only increases in its heat, inevitably this is going to be warm as well, and eventually become hot as well. When the animal soul is going to execute or express its constant drive and desire to Hashem, inevitably the animal soul is going to start warming up, and eventually, as the Lashon Alter Rebbe says, l'shanaisa, to change it, ulahavcha, which means to transform it from the worldly pleasures to love Hashem. And this is where we can conclude it. With all your heart, with both your heart. Go ahead.
Are we all created the same way in terms of the balance between the divine soul and the animal soul? Or can different people exhibit a different proportion of each? For example, when you use the example of someone coming into a Shabbos and their divine soul being receptive to that. So we know, those of us who do Kiruv, that some people just seem to be more innately receptive than others. So does that have to do with the unique balance of the animal and spiritual souls within them?
You can say so. And I don't think there's two people, just like there's no two people alike. There's no two Jews alike in the way they are receptive to Yiddishkeit. Or to even from people, the way there's no two Yidden who are sensitive to the same or have this same expression of sensitivity to a mitzvah or to learning Torah. The question is, what is the reason, what stands behind it? We go back even to the second chapter also, as the way there's certain neshamas, it begins even sometimes by birth, that certain neshamas souls are more manifest than others. Now, Rebbe points out certain reasons. Again, it's the end of the second chapter. He explains a little bit, taps into the world of souls, and he shows us many times that even in the very beginning, before the person began his service to God, which means before he put his own input into this world of Avodas Hashem, service of God, his or her soul could be more manifest than another person. So that carries along throughout the person's life based on the reasons the Rebbe writes in the second chapter, which you're more than welcome to look into the end of the second, or rather the entire second chapter for that matter, particularly towards the end. And then there's certain people who worked on themselves over the years. They worked on themselves to uncover their godly soul, or to make their God they worked themselves in order to reveal more of their godly soul because of their toil and effort in their avodas Hashem, in their service to God. That uncovered so many more layers, or uncovered the layers which many times can cover over the godly soul, so the godly soul could be more manifest. And because of different things which they've done, hence they have different merits based on their avodah, their service, which they've done. And again, there's no two yidden have the same account, because every yid is challenged with different challenges. Therefore, we don't compare two yidden. We always, for that matter, the Mishnah tells us, judge your fellow yid favorably, because no two people have the same challenges. But it could be because of different merits or different challenges the person overcame, or in general his overall investment in his avodas Hashem, so he revealed more of his godly soul, so he's more sensitive to the divine, the Shabbos table, or to any mitzvah for that matter. So the answer is yes, but the answer, it's not only a balance which just came out of nowhere. Sometimes it exists from the perspective of the neshama before the person starts serving God, and sometimes based on the service of God, how much he invested. So here we were holding on the words v'hainu sheyala v'yavai, that the person, what does it mean that the enemy becomes a ally? So he says sheyala v'yavai v'yagia, that the person ascends and he comes and he reaches. That's what it's literally what it means. I'm not sure exactly the literal meaning of the words, which means he reaches of level madregas avarabba b'chiba yiseira mi madregas ava aza krishpei eish. He reaches a greater love and a greater connection, a greater affectionate love from him to Hashem, higher and deeper than the love which is more a fiery love, which was called Ava Aza, the strong and fervorous love that does not yet cause the transformation of one Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Hara rather, to a Yetzer Tov. Meaning like this, he goes like this, he says, so the way it's read is that the person reaches a higher level of love to Hashem, which that higher level of love to Hashem has the ability to transform the Yetzer Hara to the Yetzer Tov, as opposed to the first level of love, which he calls it Ava Aza, strong, fervorous love, like a fire. So it says there's love which is associated with water, love which is associated with fire. What is the difference of love which is associated with fire, love which is associated with water, and why precisely the love associated with water, or the love which he calls Avarabba, the love which is called Avarabba, as opposed to Ava Aza, has the ability to transform the animal soul to godliness? How so? It should be similar, in other words, to the love of Hashem, similar to the godly soul. How so? So he says like this. You look at the nature of fire, and you look at the nature of water. Very briefly, water is calm and tranquil, while fire is fervorous. Look at the flame of fire, and look at water. Water by nature is calm, fire is the opposite. Anything else but calm. And within our hearts also, there's a difference when someone has a drive to something, or someone has a pleasure of something. When you have the drive to something, in this case you have driven to God and godliness, it doesn't completely uproot, it doesn't completely negate your pleasure which you have in anything else. I love God, I'm driven to God. It doesn't mean that I cannot have a very natural pleasure in biting into a good chocolate cake. Even though it says in number Musa Sfarim, famous Sefer, Musa Sefer, I can't remember which one it is, come back to me in a moment. He says that two loves do not dwell together, cannot be in the same container. Or you love Hashem, or you love Olam Haza, worldly matters. But he says, what kind of, so if you want to dissect, if you want to break it down, it's not necessarily so if you didn't conquer, if it's a love which is not associated with pleasure, not necessarily does it negate any pleasure in any worldly affair or worldly matter. When you're driven to something, like we says, the fiery love, you're driven, you want it very much, but the fact that you're driven to it means to say you have not reached there yet. You're driven to that. What about you? So you're driven to it, but your essence is not there. Because if that was you, it means if this love was really took you over and that became your pleasure, you're not driven to something that's already part and parcel of yourself. The moment you say that the love is like a fiery love, which means it's jumpy, it's driven to something, it means to say as much as your focus and your attention is to that, in this case love of Hashem, but you are driven to love Hashem. It means to say you are not, your makeup is not love of Hashem. Hence, because your makeup is not love of Hashem, there still could remain a part within you which could be driven, could even love, could even derive pleasure from something which is not ungodly. Like we said before, bite into something or any other delicacy and delight, worldly delicacy and delight, maybe even animalistic. As opposed to Avraham, he says it's a higher level, and that's called, he calls it Ava B'Tanugim, V'hi Anikreis B'Kosuv Ava B'Tanugim. Means to say this becomes your pleasure. Your pleasure, there's no deep part of a person like his pleasure, and when a person exercises pleasure, you don't necessarily see a drive to something. It's just on the contrary, it's an expression of calm and complete tranquility. Complete calm and tranquility is because you're there in the place you want to be. You are deriving pleasure at that time. When you're driven to something, you're not calm. But when you're there, when you have pleasure of something, quite on the contrary, you're completely calm because that's what you have pleasure from, and then you are all there, that world of pleasure which you're deriving at the moment. So when you're dealing with Ava Aza, a fiery love, you're driven to God, you have a love, a fiery love to God, but because it's Kirish Be'esh, it's a kind of passion which is associated with fire, so it didn't completely consume you. It's not your pleasure. Hence you can have even subtly pleasure from something which is not necessarily godly. As opposed to the higher level, Ava B'Tanugim, the person reaches the love which is associated with pleasure, at least Anigal Hashem, to derive pleasure of godliness. Me'ein Elam Haba, similar to Elam Haba, like the souls in Elam Haba, they're not jumping. We in this world, at times we could feel that something devoid in our life when we want to leave that and we're driven to godliness. The world and the neshamas in Elam Haba, they're not jumping. They're there. They're deriving pleasure because, in other words, in Elam Haba, it's all about God and godliness, and the whole interest of the soul, which is divested from body and bodily needs and desires, is completely it's love, and again, its only interest is in God and godliness, and that's what Elam Haba is. So that's where it is. So in Elam Haba, the expression is Tainug Elam Haba. It's the pleasure of Elam Haba. So in this world, when we're dealing with the higher level of Ava, it's the Ava B'Tanugim, the pleasurely love. And because it's pleasure, and as we mentioned, pleasure is the core of the person. There's no deeper koch within man other than pleasure. So if his pleasure is in God, it's impossible to have pleasure in something which is antithetical of God and godliness. Again, when you're dealing with being driven to something, which means I'm here, I'm driven to that. It means to say I'm not deriving pleasure yet from godliness, I'm driven to it. So my pleasure is still open and can be open to deriving pleasure of something which is opposite of God and godliness. When the person reaches the Avraham, which he calls it Ava B'Tanugim, that his love is already a calm, tranquil, and tranquility is not a deficiency of you. On the contrary, that is the nature of pleasure. It's only about being calm and tranquil because you're there in the place where you want to be. So the core, the essence of the person is completely involved in God and godliness. That has the ability, this higher level of love has the ability to transform the Yetzer Hara, that the person could love Hashem b'chol levavcha, with his animal soul as well. Because at that point my whole pleasure is God. My pleasure is God and godliness. It cannot be a pleasure of something which is opposite of God and godliness. That's what he says, and the connection to water as opposed to fire. So he says that's the difference of brain and heart. Brain is cool and calm, while heart is anything else other than cool and calm. He says the pleasure comes from Me'ah Chochmah, and the Seichel Hamis'ali Baskalas Hashem. It's in the brain of wisdom, and intellect which derives pleasure of the understanding and perception of God, v'idiyasi and knowledge of God, based on the ability of his intellect and his wisdom. It is the water and the seed of the Eir Zarua, the light. Should be kedushas nefesh, which in the godly soul, hamahapeches, which transform l'teiv, the good. It transformed to good. It takes something which is Yetzer Hara, which is animalistic initially, and transforms it to good, which is the Mayim Shem Nefesh Bahamis, the water which exists within Nefesh Bahamis. If you remember in the first chapter, and later the Alter Rebbe alludes to it in the 6th chapter as well, that the water dimension of the Nefesh Bahamis, the Alter Rebbe explains that in the first chapter that everything is comprised of fire, Eish Ruach Mayim Afer, the four elements, correct? Thank you. The 4 elements: Eish, fire; Ruach, which is air; Mayim, water; Ofer is dust. Now, the Rebbe shows us how man's character, and even the Nefesh Godly soul also has it. But here when you're dealing with the water of the Nefesh Bahamis, the Rebbe shows us in the first page how all negative characters of man are associated with these 4 elements. And when it comes to the pleasure with the animal soul, always looks for involvement which ultimately contributes to its pleasure. Alter Rebbe says it's associated with the element of water, because water is matzmichim kol minei tainug. Alter Rebbe explains there, it says water sprouts everything of pleasure, vegetation, everything grows and becomes something which is a catch to the eye, to the interest, to the gishmak, in other words, to the comfort of the animal soul, initiates from water. So the Alter Rebbe points out that this dimension of finding pleasure or worldly, animalistic pleasures within the animal soul is the mayim, is the water dimension element of the animal soul. So the water of the nefesh elikis, which is again associated with its intellect, that has a profound perception to the extent of enormous pleasure where the godly soul has in godliness, which is more than the fiery love of the heart. It's that calm, that the tranquility associated with pleasure that transforms to good the water within an animal soul, from there comes tavis tanugelim haza, the lusts and desires and pleasures of worldly matters, again associated with mitchila, which the nefesh bahami animal soul initially is associated with. It is completely transformed. Like it's written in Eitz Chaim, which is again the famous Chaim Vital, which he wrote his sefer, classic sefer, Eitz Chaim, Tree of Life. He's divided into portals and chapters. The 50th portal, the 3rd chapter within the 50th portal, B'Shem HaZayar, and the name of the Zayar, he writes there, Shahara Nepach Li'istay, that the evil could be completely transformed to be Teiv Gomor, to be completely good, Kimei Yitzateiv Mamash, to be exactly Yitzateiv. Not even, to the extent you wouldn't even find the difference between Yitzateiv and Yitzhahara. That's what it says in Zohar. That the Yitzhahara could become so transformed that it could become exactly like the Yitzhahara. And again, because you're dealing with the pleasure the godly soul introduces into the system of the body, that entire pleasure is associated with godliness. So when you're dealing with pleasure, which takes over, which is the core of man, there is no room for anything else, any other pleasure. Hence, the Yitzhar Tahara is completely transformed to become like Yitzhar Teiv Mamash. When it's taken away the unclean garments, which in Tanugei Lamhaza, which are the pleasures of worldly pleasures, or pleasures of this physical world, which initially is invested in them. So here in these few words you see this, which the Alter Rebbe, which mentioned before, that you could have the same energy, like we said the missile, as an example. We use this as an example. It's an energy. The question is what cap you're putting on the missile. The same thing. The animal soul is a drive. It's enormous energy. So again, if it's a surround, it's only introduced to worldly pleasures, so it's going to be driven in a way that to worldly pleasures and how to execute worldly pleasures. But if it's introduced to godliness, but not just godliness as a general concept, and not even a drive to godliness the way it's associated with the heart, like we said, that you're not there yet, you're just driven to it, but it's introduced to the pleasures of godliness. Again, because the soul, the godly soul, is involved in the most deepest core of man, which is his pleasure, that is either he based on his intellect. In other words, he has such a clear, comprehensive understanding of God and godliness, to the extent that he's full of pleasure of this God and godliness. So that eventually takes away the cap. He says, "Begadim atzayim," the unclean garments of the animal soul. So what does it remain to the animal soul? Ultimately is driven to God and godliness. And that's what it means. It becomes just like Yetzer Tov. It's worthwhile to finish. It's just a few minutes over here. So he says, here we're dealing with love. As we know, as we mentioned in the previous chapter, the structure of man is basically his chabad, which is his intellect, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Then his midas, which is his character. There's 7, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yisod, Malchus, which we went through them in a different time. On the overall, Chesed and Gvura is fear, love and fear. Tiferes, compassion, etc. And then you have thought and speech and action. So if you notice over here, the Alter Rebbe shows us that the godly soul wants the entire intellect. He starts again, he goes on over here with the love, and then he goes on. He doesn't go through all the other characters, but says, all the other characters and attributes of the heart, which are ultimately the branches of fear and the branches of love. What is the godly soul? Getting back to the analogy that the king the king wants the entire city to surrender to it. And in this case, the city is the intellect, the emotions, the thought, the speech, the action. So we're holding over here by the emotion, and that the godly soul wants the entire love, it wants the entire intellect, it wants the entire love. And here he goes on and he says, so to all the other characters, which ultimately are branches of fear and love, which are the first two main characters. What does he want? Yil Hashem Levadi, to be completely to Hashem. And from there, the Alter Rebbe goes to the garments of the soul. If you remember, Gimel and Daled. Gimel dealt with the soul itself. Daled deals with the garments of the soul. What are the garments of the soul? We mentioned this so many times. The thought, speech, and action. So when the godly soul, when we say it doesn't want anything, it wants to make sure that the animal soul doesn't have any dominance in the city. So it's not only the inner kaiches, which is the intellect and the character, but also as he jumps over to the thought, speech, and action, which are the garments, he also wants to be completely dominant. He wants to have the soul dominance over it. So if the system of man has speech, he wants it to completely surrender to God. The machshava shebemeach, and the thought which is in the brain should also be completely surrendered to God and godliness, again, which is the message of the godly soul. And how is it? In other words, in what way? They should be full from the garments of thought and speech of the godly soul, levada, solely, which is machshavas Hashem, the thought of Hashem, v'teiraseh, and the learning of Torah, li sichaseh kol hayom. And again, he speaks, sichaseh is in the context of speech, and the person a whole day should be able to speak, or rather the godly soul wants the person should be involved. The basic expression of the Gemara, le pasik pum migirsin, bababasa, the Gemara says that the true ideal mitzvah of limud Torah is the mind should be full of limud Torah, and the person should be able to constantly verbalize and utter the words of Torah, which is again the classic way of fulfilling the mitzvah of Torah. In any spare moment that he has in the day, to the extent that if he has the entire 24 hours to learn Torah, the godly soul wants the thought should be full of God, and also his Torah, and also the speech should be constantly like pasik pum migir, so that his mouth should never stop and seize a moment of learning Torah. That means the entire speech, because the godly soul will never be satisfied. Just like we said, the king is not satisfied if his opponent has part of the city. He wants the entire city. And in the case, again, in the microcosmic picture of man, if the person should learn Torah even 23 hours, but the other hour should speak Lashon Hara, the godly soul will not be satisfied. Even not Lashon Hara, stam words which are not associated with the lakus, with godliness, the Nefesh Elikis is not satisfied. He wants kol hayom lepasik pum migir, so that the mouth should be complete conduit to learning of Torah, complete chariot. In other words, it should be a vessel, it should be a conduit to learning Torah. So just to note over here, you see over here, he speaks about Torah, the learning of Torah, but before that he says, Machshavas Hashem. There's a special mitzvah where the godly soul wants that if we have thought, our thought should be full of understanding and have God on our mind. Even before we introduce the learning Torah, to have God, if we have a mind, we have thought, our thought should be entirely invested in God. Additional to that, in His Torah. In the context of speech, like pasuk pum megirsa. And again, the godly soul crosses from thought to speech to action. If we have action, if we have the kayach of action in our hands, and all the other 248 limbs, should be completely devoted to the actions of mitzvahs. And it's again, he says, levad, it's not enough that I'm going to devote 80% of my action to mitzvahs, and the other one, chas v'shalom, to avedes, or things which are ungodly, not necessarily transgression, things that are ungodly. The nefesh halikis is not going to be satisfied. Just like that king, he wants the entire city and territory to surrender to it. In this case, Alter Rebbe adds, even when it comes to ma'isa mitzvahs, a more an external expression of the godly soul. Just like action is more external, which is the third garment, the third garment of the godly soul, which is usually involved in Ma'aseh mitzvahs. He wants it levad, solely in mitzvahs and not in anything else. In other words, he wants everything. What does the Nefesh Bahamis want? The Nefesh Bahamis, which is the other king, which is he has the same interest. He wants everything of the entire city. He wants, but Alter Rebbe doesn't elaborate over here because Alter Rebbe doesn't need to tell us. First of all, we know what the animal soul. I mean, we all know. It's not a matter of knowing. Alter Rebbe doesn't want to elaborate. Well, you see that the Alter Rebbe devotes and explains the other king, in this case the animal soul, just in 1.5 lines. The Nefesh Halikis explains the entire period, because this is what we're supposed to know, what the Nefesh Halikis wants. We don't have to know so much what the animal soul wants, additional to we usually know, as human beings we usually know, but the main thing is, where am I going to elaborate? I'm going to elaborate what the true king wants, which is the Nefesh Halikis. Nefesh Bahamis, Shema Klipa, Ritzeinu Lehepach Mamash. It wants just the opposite, but here the Alter Rebbe, in the last few words of this chapter, says something fascinating. He says, L'tevas ha'adam, for the good and the benefit of man. In other words, the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul, even though on the surface it wants just the opposite. If it has action, it wants to get involved in animalistic action, maybe even Averis. Chas v'shalom, if it has speech, it wants to speak nonsense, things which are trivial, meaningless, etc. And Chas v'shalom, it doesn't mind to cross over on its own. If you give into it in things which are meaningless, it'll cross over to lashon hara, to the chilas, things which are prohibited. And the same thing, it wants the thought to think shtusim, to think nonsense. So chas v'shalom, it can even transgress the things which are prohibited to think. And so too, it has feelings. It wants the person to be driven. Its love and its fear, things which are non-godly. And so too, in intellectualize, the little intellect it has, it wants the person to invest in things which are ungodly, overtly ungodly, or things which are non-godly. But the Alter Rebbe says that means lehepach. Whatever we elaborate from the godly soul, which you know lehepach, it's the opposite as when it comes to the animal soul. But here the Alter Rebbe says this fascinating word, l'tevas ha'adam. It doesn't stam want to just for the sake to do the opposite. It wants for this. It's all for the sake of man. She's gaber levi natzchana. It wants man. It itself, the animal soul, not only godly soul, the animal soul wants that man should strengthen himself and be determined. And again, strengthen itself with determination over the Nefesh Bahamis v'yinatzchana. It wants that man should be victorious over it. Imagine you put up a fight, and the sole purpose of your fight is only that you should be won over. And that's what the Nefesh Bahamis wants. The Rebbe brings a mashal, a zaynish b'zeira kodesh, very briefly. It's probably elaborated in the English translated over here, that the king wanted to test his son, of his loyalty, if he follows the path which he was brought up in the environment of the palace. So he takes a zayna, which is a harlot, and he asks the zayna. And again, the zayna also works for the king, and it wants the benefit of the king. He asks this to persuade the son to sin. So on the surface, it's doing a perfect job, nothing less than a perfect job, because it has a mandate. It has to persuade the son to sin. But inwardly, because it's a messenger of the king, and it knows what the king really wants, that it's only a test for this, the king wants to see how loyal his son is, so it waits and it hopes that when all this, her persuasion over the son, that the son eventually will not give in and say no to her, so she could come back to the king and says, I did my job, but the main thing is you're happy. because you don't want your son to chas v'shalom demonstrate his non-loyalty to you. Quite on the contrary, this is your greatest appreciation, that despite it was challenged, yet it came over its challenges. The man is the same thing. In the Nefesh Bahamis, we are given the schus, the merit, that we're not just programmed to do Ratzon Hashem. We're not angels. If Hashem wanted us to be angels, He would never send a soul down to this world which has so many challenges and so many obstacles. But Hashem wants us to gain something which angels and even souls on high cannot gain. So He puts us in a body, and He gives us this whole animal soul in order to persuade us. And does it a great job? Does it definitely do on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minutely basis, on a secondly basis? The animal soul is always pumping its information and its signals that we should do just the opposite the way the godly soul wants. But ultimately, even the animal soul wants, she's gaber aleh, that we should be triumph over it and we should be victorious over it, because this l'teivas ha'adam, all for the benefit of the man, that we should be able to achieve all this good which is given to us not automatically, but via our efforts and our efforts and our service, which could only come when we have the challenges. So the end is very sweet. Alter Rebbe says it's true, it's lahepach mamash, and we all know it. But in the end, l'teivas ha'adam, for the good of man, that we should overcome it and we should triumph in our avodas Hashem. Have a great night.